Welcome, everyone, to Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We're your hosts and co-founders of FantasyForesight.com, coming to you from the Rambo Fixture Company studios. We're your hosts.
I'm Ben.
And
I'm Jay.
You ready to get rolling, Jay?
You know it. Let's do this.
All right, let's go. Welcome in, everyone. It is Saturday, July 18th. And Jay and I are back with you with the second episode of our preview season, and we have got the wide receivers and the tight ends of the AFC East. How you doing this morning, Jay?
Ben, got my coffee ready to go, and I'm excited to dive in to the wide receivers and tight ends. You know, I'm not just saying this. We come into these podcasts. Ben does such a remarkable job gathering all of this data. Steve's deep dive blog, which you can find on the Fantasy Foresight website under the Foresight Encyclopedia tab, is bringing a new angle this season. And I love it. And honestly, I come into these previews with some preconceived notions about guys, and then my thoughts about players completely change. And it's not made up. It's not scripted for these podcasts. It's honest and genuine. So I can't wait to dive in and see what I'm going to learn in this week's episode.
It's a great approach to take to it. And just as a reminder to everyone, all of our ADP information is in a 12-team PPR redraft format, according to fantasyfootballcalculator.com. Whenever we are discussing season-long stats, we are discussing them according to Fantasy Pros, weeks 1 through 16 in full PPR format. So just to give everybody clarity, our concepts can range a variety of league formats, but they are most applicable to full PPR 12-team redraft. So with that said, we'll dive right in, and we are going to start once again a little bit in reverse like we did on the last episode and dive into the tight ends first before we hit the wide receivers. And first up, we're going to go in order of ADP, and at the tight end position in the AFC East, the first tight end drafted is not until the 1304 as the tight end 15. And we're talking about Miami Dolphins tight end Mike Gesicki. Austin Hooper and TJ Hawkinson are going right in front of him, and Jonnu Smith and Eric Ebron are going right behind him. His 2020 projection is tight end 14. And his current total Foresight rank is a little low. We are still working on ratcheting that up, so I expect that to change very soon. He's currently sitting at tight end 20. This is going to be his third season in the NFL. His rookie year, he didn't play that much. Last year, it was tight end 17 in points per game. He didn't miss a game, 47 receptions on 82 targets for 536 yards, 4 touchdowns, had an 11.4 yards per reception average. Weeks 9 through 16, however, he did start to come on a little bit. He was tight end 11 in consistency, including 4 top 5 finishes in that span. So, like I said, in the second half of the year, he really came on. And some notable information from playerprofiler.com on Mike Gesicki. They list his best comp as Vernon Davis, which, that surprised me. And, Vernon had a really nice career in the NFL and in fantasy. And be nice to see Mike kind of assume that kind of role in fantasy. And the other notable stat from Player Profile is that Mike was third in deep targets. So Fitzmagic's pushing the ball downfield, and he's looking for Mike in the process. Now, here's where it gets a little dicey. Pro Football Focus ranks their O-line in 2020 as dead last. But we talked on our last podcast about how they did a lot to address the offensive line, and we'll see. And quite frankly, at the end of the year, it didn't seem like it mattered because they were really coming on, went into Foxborough and laid a whooping on Tom Brady and Bill Belichick when they needed that win to make the playoffs. So I digress. Strength of schedule for the tight ends is 26 out of 32 for the Dolphins. And like I said, he had a great second half of the year. He had 4 starts in the second half in 2019 where he finished those top 5 and where he finished as, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's too early in the morning for me. He had 4 starts in the second half of the season. Not every game did he start. In those 4 games, he totaled 30 targets, 15 receptions, 195 yards, and 3 touchdowns. It's not too hard for me to see Gesicki, this offense, and this entire team taking a step in 2020. Plus, Steve notes in some of the material that he gave. Sorry that Steve is not with us this morning, but he will be back with us next Wednesday and every Wednesday thereafter. He notes in his tendencies and red zone study that Gesicki saw 11 red zone targets. Wow. And for comparison, Kelsey had 19, Kittle had 16, and Ertz had 14. So when you're talking about the price tag of tight end 15, I love this value, especially considering that about 50% of the actual tight end ones every year get drafted outside the top 12 tight ends year in and year out. And I think Mike has as good of a chance as anybody to fall into that category this year.
Exactly, Ben. That's what continues to go through the back of my mind is as you're drafting tight ends, if you don't get one of those top end guys, and you mentioned all of them, Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, if you're not lucky enough, or if you're not in a position to grab one of those guys earlier in a draft, then you wait. All right, that's the name of the game. And if you're gonna wait, then there's a good chance you can grab a guy who's going to end up as a top 12 tight end and not have to pay that price for him. And right now, Mike is going right around two other tight ends that I really like, and I think all three have a solid chance of outperforming their ADP in Austin Hooper, TJ Hawkinson, and Mike Gesicki. So love the value. I like everything. I like exactly how he finished last season, the way he was trending. Like you said, I expect the Dolphins to take another step this season, and I think Mike does too. So I think great value at tight end 15, and I think he bests his performance last season. I was going to say, absolutely. After Mike, I was just thinking in my head, like, what tight ends are we going to cover today? This is going to be a quick segment on this episode.
And you're absolutely right. It starts with the next guy.
Yeah, so we're going to move into New York Jets tight end Chris Herndon, who is currently going undrafted. So we have one tight end in the AFC East currently being drafted in drafts. And Chris Herndon right now, his 2020 projection is tight end 17. We don't have him thrown back into Total Foresight as of yet, as Ben mentioned, and that is completely on me. We are still working on getting Total Foresight up and running and dialed in. So, Chris Herndon has had some injury issues. 2 out of the last 3 seasons, he has not finished and not played. 2 years ago, he finished in as tight end 21. Now, look, talented guy, but he only played in 1 game last season, in which he had 2 targets, but no statistics. There's really not much to cover because, well, like I said, he did not play. And the Jets, according to Pro Football Focus, have the 27th ranked offensive line. Now, for the tight end position, they do have the 10th best strength of schedule, so that is a little bit of a plus for Chris Herndon. And like I said, he is a talented guy. But at this point, he's a pure dart throw. The organization still believes in him and hopes Herndon and Perriman can help improve Darnold's 25th ranked red zone attempts. I do think he'll be streamer worthy here and there, but that's about it unless this offense takes a major step.
You're absolutely right. We're not going to waste much time on him. Unless you're in a 2 tight end format, you're really not looking to draft this guy whatsoever. I mean, keep your eye on him in case he starts to finally come on. But like Jay said, there's only going to be a couple times where he's usable whatsoever. And the same goes for the next guy on this list. You've got Buffalo Bills tight end Dawson Knox, who kind of became a trendy name for a couple of weeks last year. He is currently going undrafted as well, projected as tight end 27. Total Foresight has him down at tight end 35. He finished as tight end 36 in points per game last year. Didn't miss a game, but wasn't used that heavily. 28 receptions on 50 targets for 388 yards and 2 touchdowns. Did have a nice 13.9 yard per reception average, and he was a rookie, so it takes tight ends a few years to develop. So we'll see what this guy can be in 2 years, but right now it's again somebody that you're not even looking at unless you're in a 2 tight end format. Right. The one notable thing for him, I will say, from playerprofiler.com, is that he ranks 6th in deep targets and 1st in drop rate. So great hands,
Wow.
targeted down the field. But that said, he is another pure dart throw, especially in the 12-team PPR single tight end format that, this most notably applies to. And with Josh Allen as his QB and in that Buffalo's offense, I don't think Knox is anything other than a total emergency streamer at best in single tight end formats. He was tight end 7 in week 3 and tight end 12 in week 11. Other than that, he was not startable at all. And Steve's notes tell us that Allen was just 27th in red zone pass attempts, and Cole Beasley led the team in red zone targets.
Oh man. I'm sitting here as you're reading that off, and I'm just previewing the next person on our list when we get into the wide receiver position, and both of them present some interesting tidbits. So I'm going to dive right in because we're going to transfer to the wide receivers in this division, Ben, and it's one of Dawson Knox's teammates, and maybe the most intriguing player in this division right now as a pass catcher, and that's Stefon Diggs, who moves over from the Minnesota Vikings to the Buffalo Bills. And you just talked about some of the deep threat ability, or at least attempts, that Dawson Knox could capitalize on, and it's going to be very interesting to see how that works out for Stefon Diggs. Now, Diggs is currently going as WR26 in drafts, probably because of this Buffalo Bills offense and passing game. He's going behind Tyler Lockett and Courtland Sutton and ahead of Marquise Brown and A.J. Green. A very interesting position, for a guy who over the last 3 years has finished in as WR13, WR11, and then last year WR25 in points per game. His current projection is WR28. Now, in Total Foresight, like we said, not quite dialed in yet. It really likes Stefon Diggs at this point, probably because it doesn't know that he's been moved over to the Buffalo Bills offense, because it has him ranked as WR6 right now. So again, great dynamic player when he's healthy. Last season, didn't miss a game. He had 63, didn't miss a game during the fantasy season. He had 63 catches on 94 targets for 1,130 yards with a 17.9 yard per reception rate and 6 scores. Some notable 2019 stat ranks: he was 18th in WR1 percentage, but no floor. So he was 31st in WR2 percentage, 39th in WR3 percentage. That's the troublesome part. In 8 out of 15 games, he was a WR4 or worst. That screams best ball, Ben. Home run hitter in weekly results. Now, he was 10th in targeted air yards and 3rd in percentage of targeted air yards. So clearly a deep ball threat. To support that, he was 5th in deep targets. He was 3rd in yards per target. So again, what a home run hitter in Stefon Diggs. Now, the Bills' offensive line is currently ranked 18th out of 32. In the wide receiver position, the strength of schedule for the Bills' wide receiving core is 26th out of 32. So not great, but really, after you paint this picture, on one hand, Josh Allen has a cannon and loves to sling it downfield. But if the two of them can get on the same page, it could be explosive. But the problem is, I'm just not sure how consistent that will be and how long it will be before Allen is as comfortable with Diggs as he became with John Brown and Cole Beasley, especially in this highly unique offseason. And we've discussed how much, I think Josh Allen ranked 8th in intended air yards. So he does love to sling it downfield. The problem is he's just wildly inaccurate. So it's just whether or not he and Diggs can get on the same page. The potential is there, but so is the risk. And to be fair, that's probably baked into his price tag.
That you just said it. It is baked into his price tag a little bit. I mean, he finishes wide receiver 25 in points per game as the guy in an offense that, is kind of similar to the Bills in that they don't
Yeah, you're
pass a
right.
ton.
Yeah.
Now he's coming into a situation where Josh Allen already has this chemistry with John Brown and Cole Beasley. They don't pass the ball a ton. And Josh Allen is not very accurate so far throughout his career.
Right.
So, as a best ball player, I love Stephon Diggs. But even at the depressed price at wide receiver 26, there are some guys going around him, that I just feel comfortable with. And it's not even just related to the 5 guys or the 4 guys, 2 guys going ahead of him, 2 guys going behind him, and Tyler Lockett, Courtland Sutton, Marquise Brown, and AJ Green. It's just an overall feel situational thing. Like, it just feels too risky. It's going to be very inconsistent. If I land Stephon Diggs this season, even in a 3 wide receiver format, I'm feeling best about this guy if he's in my flex. And again, that's not even somebody that I'm targeting. And it's a shame to say because prior to last year, he finished as wide receiver 11 in points per game, wide receiver 13 in points per game. If he can consistently stay on the field, be consistently targeted, and have an accurate quarterback, like, the guy will be fine. But I cannot stand the landing spot for him. And for a guy that was unhappy with how much he was used in Minnesota,
Right.
I don't know. He could find himself pretty frustrated after a couple of weeks there in Buffalo.
Yes, you nailed it. And I'm exactly with you, Ben. We are both Stephon Diggs guys. All right, we root for him. When the Minneapolis Miracle happened, we were sitting back like proud papas seeing him make that play. But yeah, I just don't love him in that Bills offense with Josh Allen as QB. But really what it comes down to is price tag. And he's going, WR26 doesn't mean anything to me. It's the fact that he's going early in the 6th round where you're still drafting starters. And like you said, Ben, I would feel most comfortable with him in my flex. If I'm going to go with a home run hitter and a guy who may not show up week to week or produce week to week, I want that guy in my flex because when he hits that home run, that's a win right there. And I just don't want to draft my flex in the 6th round, man. I'd rather take some. If I'm going to go with dart throw, I either want to wait or I'm going to take dart throw at the running back position or somebody with a little bit, I hate to say this, but more upside, or at least maybe some more regular upside. Somebody who can come on and really be a constant producer. So I wouldn't mind having Diggs on my team. I'm just not drafting him early in the 6th round.
Well, yeah, and I mean, is boring and uninteresting as the tight ends in this division are, I think the wide receivers are actually pretty interesting to bottom.
Yeah.
And when you talk about his price tag, a wide receiver 26, and then we move on to the next wide receivers in this division. At wide receiver 29, you've got Miami Dolphins wide receiver Devontae Parker going at the end of the 6th round at the 6'10. Right behind him, you've got Julian Edelman and Brandon Cooks.
Yeah.
So again, there's just some, we're moving on from Stephon Diggs because I am much more excited about Devontae Parker this year. He is projected as wide receiver 24. And again, we got to get Total Foresight updated because me and the Crown Jewel are ready to fight on this one. Wide receiver 35 is disrespectful. It's unacceptable, and that will be changed on our website very soon. We are working
on it, yes.
At wide receiver 29, I'm drafting this guy all day. I'm targeting him as an exceptional value. He finished as wide receiver 18 in fantasy points per game, didn't miss a game, 64 receptions on 111 targets, 1,065 yards, 9 touchdowns, and a 16.6 yards per reception average. Notable stat ranks from last year. Like I said, he was 18th in fantasy points per game. He was 13th in overall fantasy points at the wide receiver position, 19th in consistency, 5th in consistency from week 4 on, 7th in both consistency from week 10 to 16 and Foresight consistency. He was 14th in wide receiver 1 percentage, 12th in wide receiver 2 percentage, and 9th in wide receiver 3 percentage. Per playerprofiler.com, he was 5th in deep targets and 4th in completed air yards. I understand we've talked about that offensive line ad nauseum, last ranked per player, Pro Football Focus. Strength of schedule is also not favorable for him. It's last, but he's an immense talent, and it honestly doesn't bother me, especially at that wide receiver 29 price tag, where you may well be drafting him as your wide receiver 3. All I hear is how Parker's 2019 production was dependent on Preston Williams' absence. Both were bad in weeks 1 through 3. However, Preston Williams played until week 9, and from weeks 4 to 9, prior to that injury that he sustained, Devontae Parker finished better than Preston Williams 4 out of 5 of those weeks, and was still wide receiver 21 in the lone week Williams outperformed him in that span, despite, per Steve's notes, Williams seeing a higher rate of red zone targets. Parker was 14% higher in wide receiver 1 percentage, 40% higher in wide receiver 2 percentage, and 48% higher in wide receiver 3 percentage. You all go ahead and keep disrespecting Devontae Parker. Ask Jay how that went for him last year.
I was going to say, hey, I love Devontae Parker's price tag. I may take him in the 14th round this year. I don't know. We'll see if he falls. No, I'm kidding. Dude, you're bringing the stats and bringing the heat, man. I honestly, I love seeing all that, and you're absolutely right. Even at WR29 in the 6th round, I think that's fantastic value. I think he showed, like you mentioned in the statistics, you can see the numbers. He was extremely consistent, and was even more consistent the more the season went on and down the stretch. So, Devontae Parker, we've talked about it, like you said, ad nauseum. We expect this Dolphins team to take another step. They're very well coached. They seem to be buying in. They've added pieces, so we expect, that division's wide open. All right, and we've seen it's lacking top-end elite talent at the skill positions, so it's really wide open, and it's going to be a great battle to see who emerges. And I mean, I can't sit here and say that the Dolphins don't stand a chance, and Devontae Parker is the seasoned vet on that team. We can talk about Preston Williams all we want, but, I mean, he's got half a season in him. So if I'm going to bank my money on anybody in that offense, it's Devontae Parker. And at WR29 in the 6th round, with what he's done and the way he came on last season, over 1,000 yards, I love that. I think he's a tremendous value, and I would love to have him on my team and not in the flex position.
Yeah, I would. He is my wide receiver 2 in Scott Fishbowl. I would feel comfortable with him as my wide receiver 2 in your typical, redraft leagues. But he is going to return the best value he can, obviously, if you can get him as a wide receiver 3 or a flex. But yeah, it's and the train keeps on rolling with our next guy, Jay. Like, it just keeps getting interesting in this division.
I know, like you said, the players are very interesting. They may not be the elite, highly drafted players, but they're all very interesting value picks. And next up, we have Julian Edelman, constant PPR stud in fantasy football. Right now, he's being drafted as WR30 in the 7th round, going right behind Devontae Parker and in front of Brandon Cooks and Jarvis Landry. I mean, you're talking about fantasy football studs going around WR30 in the 7th or later rounds. His current projection is WR29, so right in line with his current ADP price tag. His previous finishes, the last 2 years, he has finished as WR14 and WR7 in fantasy points per game. Last year, 3 years ago, he missed the season. Last year, didn't miss a game, had 97 catches on 146 targets. Talk about volume. He had over 1,000 yards with an 11.2 yards per reception. You would think with all the checkdowns and low to intermediate routes that yardage would be less, but 11.2, not bad. He did get in the end zone 6 times, which is an area where he usually struggles because of those shorter routes. Some notable stats from 2019. He was 5th in fantasy points. He was 7th in fantasy points per game and 6th in consistency. 12th in consistency from weeks 10 through 16. 12th in Foresight consistency. 10th in WR1 percentage. 3rd in WR2 percentage, and 2nd in WR3 percentage. You want to talk about a safe floor in PPR formats. Julian Edelman was it. He was 7th in target share percentage in an offense where we've talked about, a lack of weapons in the wide receiving core. He was even 5th in red zone receptions, Ben. 5th in red zone percent. That's just crazy. He had 15 red zone targets. That offensive line, 7th out of 32 teams. In the wide receiving core for the Patriots this year, the strength of schedule is ranked as 20th, and it is going to be a different dynamic with Tom Brady not under center. But Edelman had an absolute monster PPR season in 2019. And as Steve told us last episode, Edels was tied for WR3 in red zone targets with 20 plus targets. In Steve's notes, I see he was WR4 in red zone receptions too. Even before Cam signed in New England, I loved his downright disrespectful price tag as WR30. But now, he may be the best wide receiver value in 2020's draft.
Yeah, I mean, you see when Steve tells you that he was targeted in the red zone 20 times, and that was tied for wide receiver 3. That tells you that is a scheme, that is a role, that is the intent of that offense. And I mean, what has changed so much about the pass catchers in New England this year? And even when it was Stidham, I still like Julian Edelman is a quarterback's best friend. He is going to be an easy completion for you. He's going to move the sticks for you. And sometimes he's going to get in the end zone for you. So whether it's Stidham or Cam Newton or whoever, I really think that Edelman is as safe of a wide receiver 3 that you can get. I mean, number 2 in wide receiver 3 percentage. Like the floor is there all day, and he presents some upside too, because that offense isn't going to be too shabby with Cam at the helm.
You said the word safe, and that's it. He was a safety blanket for Tom Brady. All right, possibly the greatest quarterback in this league, and that's not going to change for these guys, for either Stidham or Cam. He's still going to be that safety blanket and that reliable receiver that they have to bail them out of situations. So, yes, the quarterback changes. Yes, that maybe that changes the offense a little bit, but his role in that offense does not change. He is still the safety blanket for the quarterback. So, yeah.
He's getting disrespected. The man was 5th wide receiver 5 in fantasy points last season. Did everybody out there know that? Wide receiver 5 last year.
Right.
Okay. Like he still got it.
and you know what? And we all thought that offense was a bit clunky last year. So why do we think there's going to be this drastic fall off that he's going WR30 overall this year? It's crazy.
And everybody, it's well noted how inaccurate and ineffective Tom Brady was last season. So Julian Edelman doesn't even need 146 targets to get close to where he was last year with 97 receptions.
Right.
So, and with all those red zone targets, he's got that touchdown upside for you as well. Right. So do not sleep on Julian Edelman, my wide receiver 3 in Scott Fishbowl. Moving on to the next wide receiver in this division. You know, people might disagree on this guy, but he is still an interesting player. New York Jets wide receiver Jamison Crowder. He is currently going as wide receiver 45 at the 10:07 behind Mecole Hardman and Henry Ruggs, and in front of Christian Kirk and Justin Jefferson. He is currently projected as the wide receiver 36, so you already see some value there. Total Foresight currently only has him as wide receiver 45. I expect that to go up a bit here soon. And in fantasy points per game, over the last couple years, he has been on the flex radar. Wide receiver 40 in fantasy points per game last year, wide receiver 56 the year before that, wide receiver 37 3 years ago. Didn't miss a game in 2019, caught 70 passes on 112 targets for 767 yards at 11 yards per reception. He also did get in the end zone 5 times, which I found surprising. His notable stat ranks in 2019, he was wide receiver 32 overall in fantasy points, wide receiver 40 in fantasy points per game. Now, he was tied for 14th in wide receiver 1 percentage, in large part due to some of those touchdowns, but he had no floor. He was 26th in wide receiver 2 percentage and 47th in wide receiver 3 percentage. He did have 13. He was 13th in yards after catch per playerprofiler.com. We talked about how the offensive line for the Jets is not rated too highly, but they drafted Mekhi Becton. They did some things to address their offensive line as well. The strength of schedule for the wide receiver position for the Jets is second to last. So a little bit of an uphill battle there, but Jamison Crowder does all his work out of the slot. And so, I don't expect that to impact him as much. I don't see a lot of upside with Crowder, and I was surprised that his floor was lacking as it was illustrated by that 40% wide receiver 3 percentage rate, and with seeing 15 red zone targets, which according to Steve's notes was tied for wide receiver 14. So, you're getting a lot of red zone targets and you're still not producing anything better than wide receiver 40 in fantasy points per game. So if you're someone who is excited about Jamison Crowder, can I interest you in another slot wide receiver in this very division in a similar offense, but with a 20% higher wide receiver percentage, a higher wide receiver 3 percentage rate, despite seeing half as many red zone targets going for absolutely free? Well, his name is Cole Beasley. Wait, you're not excited about Cole Beasley? Good. Point is, you shouldn't be excited about Crowder either. I keep almost all the Jets away from me in 2020, period.
I like Jamison Crowder as a player, but in fantasy, you mentioned some of the guys that are going around him, Mecole Hardman, Henry Ruggs. I'm a Ruggs guy, so I just love the upside there. At this point in a draft, I got to go with more upside than a Jamison Crowder. And you mentioned the lack of floor, and I thought maybe, when we talk about WR1 percentage, WR2 percentage, WR3 percentage, maybe we need to explain that a little bit. He was 47th in WR3 percentage. That means there were 46 players who were WR3 or better more often than Jamison Crowder. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about those percentages. And so you can tell that there's just not a safe floor. Like Ben said, the offense just not great. A lot of question marks still. Now Jamison Crowder could end up presenting a nice value, but I'd rather scoop him up off the waiver wire pile than take him in my drafts. I'd rather go a little bit more upside at that point. Now we're going to move into another interesting player, and that is second-year sophomore N'Keal Harry for the New England Patriots. We've talked about how the Patriots are lacking talent on offense outside of Julian Edelman, James White, and so on. Right now, N'Keal Harry, he had a tough rookie campaign. He finished in as WR95 in fantasy points per game. Right now, is the expectation that he's going to take a step forward this year? Yes. Because really, you can't go anywhere but up after finishing WR95 in points per game. Right now, he's being drafted as WR53. So a nice step up, but still, on that WR3 flex radar. He's going behind, this is a very interesting list, Ben. He is going behind Deshaun Jackson and Sammy Watkins and in front of John Brown and Michael Pittman Jr. So right now his projection is WR65. So right in that range, of where he's being drafted. Like I mentioned, not a great rookie campaign. It left some to be desired after being quite hyped after, the Patriots took him pretty high and you had this high expectation of, a guy who could step in and maybe take over in an offense that was so needing of pass catchers. He played in 6 games in the 2019 season. He had 9 catches on 17 targets for 76 yards. He did get in the end zone twice, but really just gross, just very disappointing. What can I say? His notable 2019 comp was that his best comparison was Allen Robinson, the unicorn.
No. From a player profiler standpoint, when guys are coming out of college and they're looking at other metrics,
gotcha.
They give you a best comparable. So that comp to A-Rob is something to get my attention a little bit.
A little bit. I'd like to see it more at this level before I'm gonna jump on the bandwagon. We talked about the ranks for the Patriots this year: 7th ranked offensive line, 20th ranked strength of schedule for the receivers. Yeah, I was a little surprised his ADP was even WR53, to be honest. Figured he'd be going for free, but there's still apparently a faction out there who still believes in N'Keal Harry, and I'm one of them, Ben.
I am.
Okay,
Yeah,
why don't you take this?
we did in 2019 prior to the season an episode about the most relevant redraft rookies heading into the season, and we were really high on N'Keal Harry coming out of college. And I was very disappointed to see how he finished last year. Jay is apparently completely off the bandwagon, but I am one of the people that still believes in the talent and the role. I mean, outside of Julian Edelman, who's taken targets away from him? Like Cam said, it is calculus in that offense over there. So he was a rookie. He had a whole year to kind of get his arms around that playbook. It'll be interesting to see if he can take a step. And like I said, he's super cheap. In most drafts, he's probably going to go for free. And I do not scoff at player profile comping him in as far as his size, his skills, his ability to Allen Robinson. So I really think that once you get to this point in your draft and you're just throwing darts for potential upside, he has no floor. Don't get me wrong. But the upside is there. He could develop into something. And when you're going to throw darts at this point in your draft, you want to be targeting the upside, not some little like 4 or 5 targets a game type of role.
Yeah. I guess my thing is, later in drafts, I just, I'd rather take dart throws at rookie running backs or things like that. And like you said,
I take Michael Pittman Jr. over him, no doubt.
That's exactly it. Yes.
But I'm just saying, there's for those out
right.
there that do believe in him still, he's not an awful dart throw. And that's what he is. He's a dart throw. He's not somebody that I'm targeting or I'm like, oh my God, I'm super excited to get him. But like maybe with my last pick in my draft, depending on who else is still out there in dart throw land, he might be somebody that you want to take a shot at.
Yes. And look, very few receivers really, step up their rookie season and become fantasy relevant, especially, let alone football relevant. So, for year 2 for the guy, I would expect year 2, year 3 to see continued development out of him. So, yeah, like you said, I would expect him to take a step forward. I just don't know. I want to see it first, I guess, is where I stand currently. So
it's big time question marks.
Yeah, I'll let him.
He could be just as bad as he was last year, and we never talk about him again. That is within his range of outcomes.
Yes,
for sure.
And I guess at this point, I'd rather let somebody else take him and stash him on their bench and let him take up that coveted spot. I know in our league of record, we have very thin benches, so I'd rather have somebody with maybe a little bit more value right now than N'Keal Harry. So let's move on.
And you're not going to hear any argument out of me. You're not going to hear any argument out of me with that position.
Yeah.
The only thing about it is, I'm not going to be absolutely shocked if this guy comes out of nowhere to be some like flex worthy type of player this year.
Yeah.
So that's my only point. Keep him on your radar. Definitely, it's a penny stock type of player. There are 2 out of the 3 guys that we have left to cover on this podcast I feel much better about than N'Keal Harry heading into 2020. And one of those guys is Buffalo Bills wide receiver John Brown. He's currently going as wide receiver 54, right behind N'Keal at the 1209 spot, right in front of Michael Pittman Jr. and Preston Williams. His current projection is wide receiver 45. Total Foresight likes him as wide receiver 27. He was wide receiver 22 in fantasy points per game last year. Didn't miss a game. 72 receptions on 115 targets for over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns, and almost a 15-yard per reception average. He ended up as wide receiver 15 overall in fantasy points. He was the 12th most consistent wide receiver. He was wide receiver 19 in consistency from weeks 10 to 16, and he was a back-end wide receiver 2 at 20th in Foresight consistency. He also provided a very sustainable floor. He was 10th in wide receiver 3 percentage. Like Jay said, only 9 wide receivers in the entire NFL finished as a wide receiver 3 or better more often than John Brown in 2019. Notable next-gen stats. He was 8th in targeted air yard percentage with 36%. Stephon Diggs was third in that same category in Minnesota. So one or both of those guys' volume is going to go down unless Josh Allen's pass attempts goes significantly up. So that will be something to watch. We talked about the middle of the road offensive line for the Bills, and they do have one of the worst strength of schedules at the position, 26 out of 32. And, I really like John Brown, the player, but in that Bills offense with Diggs coming to town, that makes for a very iffy situation, primarily for three reasons. One, the Bills don't throw the ball a lot. Two, Josh Allen is still his quarterback with accuracy issues. And three, his fantasy performance last year was largely due to his target share. And four, per Steve's notes, he tied for 84th amongst all pass catchers in red zone targets with 8. So, that paints a bleak picture for John Brown. But when you compare John Brown's price to Stephon Diggs' price and consider that John Brown has a whole year of chemistry developed with Josh Allen, if you're going to pick between Stephon Diggs and John Brown, I'm more inclined to go the John Brown route just because he's half as expensive. He's going in the 12th instead of the 6th.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one. I was very surprised by some of the stats for John Brown, and it kind of made me start to like him more. But then, then you remember that Stephon Diggs is now in that offense. Very similar deep ball threat, and look, there are offenses that can sustain two high-end players. We've seen it in Minnesota with Diggs and Thielen. Thielman. Wow, I need some more. I'm out of coffee, Ben. With he and Thielen, and look, the Minnesota offense at times hasn't been the most pass heavy or volume heavy offense. So is it impossible to see it in Buffalo? No. I just don't think it's very likely either, and that's not necessarily a volume thing. It's just for me, it's an accuracy thing. Now, look, maybe Josh Allen takes a big step this year and adding Diggs in, getting another talented receiver in that wide receiving core. Maybe that accuracy rate goes up, and both of these guys can be fantasy relevant. I'm just not willing to bet on that right now until I see it. And in drafts, like you said, there are just guys going around these other players that I'd feel much more comfortable, taking and putting in my flex or putting on my bench right now than Diggs or Brown. And again, I like both the guys, and especially Brown. His stats are surprising, but I see some regression in those stats in 2020. So let's move on to another complimentary player who we've already touched on, and that is Miami Dolphins wide receiver Preston Williams. Preston Williams is currently being drafted as WR56, even though he's projected as WR43, and after finishing WR44 in points per game last season. He did play in 8 games last year. He had 32 catches for on 60 targets for 428 yards and had a nice 13.4 yards per reception rate, and did get in the end zone 3 times. In his 8 games, he was WR47, WR48, WR46, WR42. Are you seeing a trend, Ben? A lot of 40s here. It doesn't get better. At least not a whole lot. WR61. Now, WR29. Okay. We're starting to get into that WR3 range now. Nice. And then WR55. And then he had one outstanding game where he finished WR7. 1 out of 8 games. Was he really a significant fantasy player? Now, he was 13th in targeted air yards. 13th in targeted air yards, and I just read off his fantasy finishes each week. Keep that in mind. All right, and again, we've touched on the Dolphins' offensive line and their strength of schedule for the wide receiver position, but I'm sorry. I'm just not buying the hype right now on Preston Williams. 1 WR1 game and 1 WR3 game in 8 games. Only 8 games, too, Ben. That's another thing. That's another piece of this puzzle. Prior to an ACL tear, right? And now he's a breakout candidate, and he's being drafted, around guys like Michael Pittman Jr., Brashad Perriman, Brandon Ayuk, who has potential as a rookie wide receiver in San Francisco. The best thing he's got going for him is that, per Steve's notes, he saw 10 red zone targets in just 8 games and was on pace to lead the league in that stat category prior to the injury. And yet still, only 2 WR3 or better performances in that span. I'm just not excited, but at least the price is right if you're a true believer.
I feel like I have heard very, very little about Devontae Parker this offseason, and I've heard very, very much about Preston Williams this offseason. It's annoying. It's ticking me off. I don't like it.
I could tell you're very passionate about Devontae Parker, and I didn't know if that was partially because our debate last year, and you ended up being right. Congratulations.
No, that had nothing to do.
Or
That's
if
just
it was
a little
more
icing
with
on the
this,
cake.
just the Preston Williams hype train has left the station and has left Devontae Parker behind.
That's what it is, man. And Steve was on it last year during the season. He did call out Preston Williams as a speculative stash before people really got onto him. What I don't understand, though, is how all of a sudden now he is a breakout candidate after an ACL tear, after he only finished as a wide receiver 3 or better twice in 8 games, despite seeing an insane amount of red zone targets. Then Devontae Parker, all he did was go on to develop amazing chemistry with Ryan Fitzpatrick down the stretch. And in an off season where you can't really practice together, that's going to mean a lot. And I mean, the prices are reflected accurately. I just feel like I have heard an annoying amount about Preston Williams this year, and Devontae Parker's getting disrespected, and he's going to smash Preston Williams' performance this year just like he did last year.
Love it. Hey, you know how we are as a society. We love shiny new toys. We love the new and flashy thing, and Preston Williams is the new name. And
people were waiting for Devontae Parker to break out for years. It finally happened, and now you're off him?
Oh, yeah.
Like, get out of here.
Ready to move
you're
on.
Silly.
We gotta wait. We gotta look at for the next breakout star now. I mean, we talked about it. Look at Julian Edelman's price tag. He's not flashy. He's not the shiny new toy. He's a year older, and yet all he's done is produce in fantasy, and now we're like, okay, well, what's the next fun thing? That's fine. More for you and me, right, my friend?
The next fun thing is a repeat performance from Devontae Parker. Yeah, the next fun thing is the repeat performance from Devontae Parker.
Yeah,
that's the next fun thing.
Yeah.
So let everybody be all hyped about Preston Williams, and he could be a fine player. That's fine, but breakout potential sleeper guy. No, I disagree.
All right.
And we'll find out. Maybe I'll have to eat my words about him like Jay had to about Devontae Parker. We shall see. Rounding out this episode, we have got what I consider to be a pretty exciting wide receiver.
Yeah.
You've got the potential new number 1 wide receiver for the New York Jets in Brashad Perriman. He is currently going as wide receiver 58 behind Preston Williams and Brandon Ayuk at the 1402 in front of Golden Tate and Michael Williams. I'm sorry, one more time before we completely move on from Preston Williams. How are you not taking Brashad Perriman or Golden Tate emphatically over Preston Williams at that point in your draft? All day, easy. And Golden Tate going down there, a wide receiver 59 is stupid. Like that's an amazing draft value right there. So anyways, back to Brashad Perriman. Excuse me. He is currently projected as wide receiver 58. Total Foresight likes him as wide receiver 18. His fantasy points per game, in varying roles, bouncing around in teams, has not been good the last 3 years. And, he wasn't even that exciting because he wasn't getting that opportunity for the majority of the season last year. And I will say this. Every year there's a couple of guys, like I remember Robert Foster a couple years ago, who ended the season strong, the former wide receiver for the Bills. And, and people get excited about a small sample size, but Brashad Perriman was on an entirely different level. This guy didn't have a couple of nice like wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 performances. From weeks 13 to 17, I know we typically only talk about weeks 1 to 16 on this podcast, but for this specific discussion, when this man finally got an opportunity in weeks 13 to 17, he was 3rd in wide receiver fantasy points. 25 receptions, 37 targets, 506 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Rashad Perryman. That is your list of the most consistent wide receivers from weeks 13 to week 16. This is not a guy that caught a couple touchdowns and turned in a couple of nice wide receiver 3 flex type of performances. He was the 4th most consistent wide receiver when it mattered the most, trying to get into the playoffs and throughout the fantasy playoffs last year. He was 14th in deep targets and 6th in yards per reception. Now, the Jets offensive line, we've talked about that. We've talked about their strength of schedule, but at wide receiver 58, he's pretty much free. Now, I can't stand Adam Gase or the Jets, but if they take a step, it will be because Sam Darnold progresses significantly in his 3rd season. And if that happens, then Perryman's got a shot of being a major late round value. But Darnold would have to drastically up his 25th ranked yards per attempt and heavily target Perryman in the red zone for that to come to fruition. That will remain to be seen. I do not like his landing spot, but completely free, upside-wise. Golden Tate at this point in draft gives you a very unusually high floor for somebody going this high. So depending on what you need, I would go Golden Tate over Rashad Perryman if you're looking for somebody that's going to be some sort of consistent producer in case of an injury, by whatever. But if you're going for upside on this list, for my money, I'm taking Rashad Perryman.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's any secret we're Rashad Perriman guys on this podcast. So, you know, when it gets late in drafts, or if you're in a very deep format and you're looking for solid bench players, you know, I really like Rashad Perriman. And even in that Jets offense, I mean, they're still going to score points. They're still going to move the ball at times. So, you know, somebody's going to be catching passes, and it's him, Jamison Crowder. And, you know, I just, like you said, I've seen him do it at a very high level for a consistent amount of time. I mean, it wasn't the smallest sample size, and it was at an elite level. So we know he can still do it. And yeah, you know, at that point in drafts, you know, depending on where your draft has unfolded, I really like Rashad Perriman. I do. And I'm willing to gamble and you know, throw him on my bench and hope that he can continue to produce in a questionable Jets offense.
Right. I mean, to get any of the top 32 wide receivers in actual football in the 14th round of your fantasy draft is a value.
Yes.
And if that's if that's the role Rashad Perriman ends up assuming, then at in the 14th round, that's an immense value. It just is.
Yeah.
Because he's going to see 100 plus targets as the top wide receiver on an NFL team. So, you know, exactly. It's you know, at this point in the draft, there's major question marks for everybody and for good reason, but that's all baked into the penny price tag that they have on them.
Yep.
So, you know, I mean, you look at the AFC East, the quarterbacks are a little more exciting than expected. The running backs were very interesting. The tight ends were a snooze fest outside of Mike Gesicki. And the wide receivers are extremely interesting. Now, all of a sudden that Tom Brady's gone, this division becomes an extremely interesting one to watch, especially in the first couple of weeks of the season when we really start to pay attention to roles, trends, and you know, and who's really starting to do what against the competition. So, you know, we usually start with the AFC East for this reason. It's one of the less exciting fantasy divisions in the NFL. But, you know, I will say that it pleasantly surprised me this year. But, man, we got a doozy coming up on
next
Wednesday.
Up, baby. Yeah. NFC East.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got anything else before we get out of here, Jay?
I don't think so. You know, you said it. While the division lacked, you know, elite top-end talent in fantasy football, it really is loaded with value picks and important players, and getting a good vantage point of where all those guys fit in and where the true value really is you know, it's extremely important when really filling out your fantasy team, because, you know, we talk about it. hitting on the early picks is important. It is. But where you can really take a big step forward is filling out your fantasy roster with quality. And that happens in the middle to late rounds. And that's what the AFC East is. It's just chock full of guys that you can fill out your roster with and find tremendous value. So, it was good, but boy, am I eager to move on to the NFC East, where you have a lot of the top-end talent now. And still some interesting guys thereafter. So I can't wait to dive in.
You're absolutely right. And we'll have our guy at FF_encyclopedia, our guy Steve, back with us on Wednesday, and he'll have a brand new accompanying blog covering the offensive tendencies and the red zone tendencies of all the teams in the NFC East. And we're given the quality of this division, it's kudos, but you're not going to have to look very far to get excited about the players in the NFC East.
Yep.
And it starts with the quarterbacks and the running backs of the NFC East, which we will be back with you on Wednesday to discuss. Can't wait. Calm it down on Preston. Devontae Parker's man. Welcome, everyone, to Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We're your hosts and co-founders of FantasyForesight.com, coming to you from the Rambo Fixture Company studios. I'm Ben.
And I'm Jay.
You ready to get rolling, Jay?
You know it. Let's do this.
All right, let's go.